Well, thank you all, virtual and panelists. On behalf of the BMFA, obviously, I would like to welcome all to this inaugural In the Air Tonight webinar. It's going to happen every Tuesday for the next 12 weeks. We'll be hearing from many of our specialist disciplines and general aero modelling. We'll be encouraging all to participate, and we hope to learn a little more about the sport we're passionate about. Without further ado, I should say even, let me pass you over to Andrew Boddington for tonight's seminar on 1,000 issues of the Aeromodeller. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good to see everyone's names flashing up. I certainly recognise one or two people in there. Hopefully I'm on camera at the moment. I'm going to go through a bit of a PowerPoint presentation first, and then come back and do some more camera work and answer some of your questions. So, bear with me. You should be able to see my PowerPoint screen. Is that look good?
Yep, that's visible.
Thank you. So, 1,000 issues of Aeromodeller is quite a milestone. There aren't many publications that can say that. I'll tell you a bit about myself first. I'm Andrew Boddington. What got me the job? Well, you've probably got some ideas yourself about how I got the job, but first of all, my background is actually, I got a science degree, worked in computing, particularly the last few years in marketing. And in marketing, I was doing a lot of copywriting, planning, catalogues and things like that. So actually, unbeknownst to me, it set me up well to become editor of Model Aircraft magazine. So that was a good start, but probably a better start than that even was the fact that I'm the son of David Boddington, often known as Boddo. And so having that name certainly got me an interview, I think. Dad, probably best known as a radio control models designer and flyer, and produced over 500 designs to his name. And I think when I initially took over editorship of Aeromodeller 7 years ago, there was perhaps a bit of skepticism that it would just become another radio control magazine, and hopefully over the years I've quelled that, and the proof of the pudding is in the reading of the of each issue. So if I look back, so my heritage is my father's heritage to some extent, and he was born in 1932, and so growing up as a child in the 40s, he was obsessed with his brother Charles with aviation and modelling, so will have moved through the ranks of free flight and later control line. He was amazingly active and would never stay still, so over the years he got involved in many different things. In the 1970s, he was involved in models for film work and television, started pylon racing with Club 20. In later years, his eyesight wasn't as good as he would have liked, and so he returned to free flight and radio assist type modelling, and he started the Tomboy duration competitions as a way of kind of flying old engines and having a competitive edge for something that was still fun to do. So without knowing it, as a child, I had a charmed upbringing for an aeromodeller. Dad didn't differentiate between the different disciplines, so I grew up building Keelcraft flying scale and Achilles, and built control line models like Mini Goodyears and an early bird combat model, and obviously also did a lot of RC as well. So without knowing it, I was getting a very good grounding to be a future Aeromodeller editor. And if you combine that with the fact that I think my early reading experience was moving straight from Ladybird books onto my dad's pile of old Aeromodelers, I was being indoctrinated without knowing it. And I'm luckier that I inherited all these old Aeromodelers and magazines, because they've turned out to be very useful for my current job. But if we look specifically back at history of Aeromodeller over these 1,000 issues, the first editor of note was D.A. Russell, Douglas Arthur Russell. He was a contributor to Aeromodeller from the very beginning, but after a couple of years, he was owed some money by the publisher, and instead of getting the money, they offered to sell him the title, and so he ended up as publisher and editor of Aeromodeller from 1937. So the magazine started in 35, and he then went on to publish Aeromodeller. He kept it going throughout the war years, which is no easy job when you consider the shortage of materials such as paper and so on. His background was definitely model engineering. This shows a picture of him with one of his large petrol powered aircraft, launching it from the top of a car at Digby Airfield. He was, I think, an amazing entrepreneur and maverick. After the war, he'd also started model cars and the model mechanic magazines. Harborough Publishing during the war had published detailed 3 views with aircraft of the fighting powers, a new book each year as the aircraft developed during the war. And obviously he also had things like the Aeromodeller Plan Service. And post-war, he moved the whole operation to Eaton Bray, and not only as a publisher, but as a model sportsdrome. So here we are 70 years later, and we've got a fine national centre at Buckminster, and good old D.A. Russell had done it first all those years ago, and it's great to be able to get back to some of those same feelings and that mixing of different disciplines on the same site. Unfortunately, he was perhaps too much of a maverick in that during the post-war period, there's obviously a shortage of building materials, and he didn't quite wait for all the official permissions before building the offices for the publisher MAP, and to house other activities, such as he had an engineering company called Dagra, who were producing full-size cars. There's about 6 of a particular car called a Russon, obviously based on his own name, produced, and really his enthusiasm overtook him, and he was taken to court by the government for not getting the right permissions for his building work, and fined a total of £4,500 back in 1948, which was probably a couple of £100,000 in today's money, which unfortunately really was the beginning of the end of his part in the story, because he eventually had to sell out the magazine publishing side, which was bought by Argus Publishing, who went on to publish Aeromodeller for many years. I noticed in the chats that Jonathan Moulton's listening in. So hello, Jonathan. This is Jonathan's father, Ron Moulton, who for me and many of you, I'm sure, is probably the editor of Aeromodeller. I was lucky because my dad obviously worked for him when he was an editor, and so he's been somebody I've known as a family friend for many years. Again, I was so lucky with my upbringing in that I got to meet people like Ron, Doug McCard, Phil Smith, Howard Boys, and so on. And all of those kind of feed into what I produce today. So Ron had his such wide interests as far as aviation and aeromodelling. When he came back from South Africa after the war, he'd already started flying control line models, I think influenced by the Americans and the American magazines he'd read. And one of his first designs for control line was the Votsac, which is now a class of its own in retro control line racing. He also designed models like Rascal and the Man of War, and free flight models such as the Ryan Spirit of St. Louis and the Oster AOP9. I think it'd be hard to find anybody who was as interested and done as many things as Ron in his lifetime. So really he was he was assistant, he joined Aeromodeller in about 1950. By 1955 he was assistant editor, and through the 1960s he was editor of Aeromodeller until Peter Richardson took over in 1971. And in that time, January 1966, Aeromodeller took on board model aircraft, which finished. So we've got that line of heritage to us as well. And after finishing as editor of Aeromodeller, he started the Scale Models magazine and went on to hold a senior position within MAP and Argus, its owning publisher, until his retirement in 1989. So a very big character and very well respected throughout the world, basically. And not just in aeromodelling. Anyone who read Aeromodeller in the 70s and early 80s will know the coverage of man-powered flight, which was another of his passions. And also, perhaps not so well known, his love of kite flying. He did produce 1 or 2 specials on kites as well. This photo I love. It shows editors over many years. So it's taken at the 50th anniversary of the SMAE, now of course the BMFA, in 1972. And from the left, there's Peter Richardson, who was then the editor of Aeromodeller, Ron Moulton, Harry Hundleby, who'd been the editor earlier. And on the extreme right, there is D.A. Russell himself. So I know there's many readers now who tell me they've got every issue of Aeromodeller from when they first read it as a youth. And some of these covers will look familiar. I think Aeromodeller has always been well known for having strong cover images, none more so than in the 1940s with, before the advent of photograph covers, particularly C. Rupert Moore, Charles Rupert Moore. His paintings are absolutely excellent and evocative of various types. When you get to the 50s and 60s, you've got people like on the left, the Sup with Snipe cover was done by Laurie Bagley. He was also an aeromodeller and designed a free flight version of Bishop's Newport. On the right is a painting by Ken, I think it's pronounced McDonough. Forgive me if I get the pronunciation wrong. Ken obviously was also a prolific scale modeller. Aeromodeller published plans of his small Sup with Pup and the BE2. So if we get up to my time as editor of Aeromodeller, painted covers was something I really wanted to be able to still do. They're not always the easiest and cheapest covers to produce, but I've had support to do that. And so two of my recent covers were painted by, again, another scale modeler, Cedric de la Nougrid, who is perhaps well known for having designed the free flight P-51B Mustang. Cedric's also an aviation artist as well, so produced those two covers for me. Not only were the painted covers iconic, I think when you get to the 60s, when we started having colour photos, there's something about the saturation of the process in that time that makes some of these covers very memorable. So when you see on the left there's a picture of Ray Edwards and Ken Long with their team race models, and to the right is a picture taken at the 1960, sorry, it's from January 1961. It's the World Championships, the Control Line World Championships in Hungary in 1960. Shows Don Still with his Stuka stunt model and Kjell Rosenlund with his Miss FAI team race model. And those World Championships turned out to be very controversial for some of the judging decisions made. And if you buy the next issue of Aeromodeller, that'll be the January 2021 issue, we've got Adrian Duncan writing about what happened there. And it spurred me into contacting Chas Taylor, who was one of the participants from the UK team, and he'll be following up with some of his memories of the time. So this kind of brings me on to what is the current Aeromodeller. Well, very much going from 1 to 1000, I see there is a lineage there that I very much want to tap into and do my best to do that. So the 1000th issue, again, had a painted cover. It was by Graham Henderson, who's a brilliant aviation artist. He can paint in or draw in many different styles, but what impresses me is they're always very authentically of the full-size aircraft that he's describing, which isn't always the case. And so he did a painting of the full-size Northrop Racer, and Mike Stewart produced the free plan for that issue as a peanut, so a peanut version. And excuse me. So Aeromodeller was first published 85 years ago, with I think the oldest and longest running of the model aviation magazines, albeit with a break at the beginning of this century. Aeromodeller first of all came back within AMI, but 8 years ago really was relaunched as a separate magazine by Alan Harmon, who still publishes it. So I think it's important that we're not trying to be everything to everybody. We're not a mainstream RC magazine, so we don't do ready to fly RC drones, quadcopters, anything like that. So I'd say we look after the long tail of aeromodelers, and by that it's people who still build from kits or from plans, or these days from 3D printing, and are looking to not just build but fly as well. And as part of that continuity, we still do engine reviews, IC engine reviews. I must admit I can't get any enthusiasm for doing electric motor reviews, but perhaps that will change. But the first official engine review was in May 1948 of the ED competition special. And in the 1000th issue, We had Maris Disler's doing a review of the Sam 75 diesel. So like the Mills 75, it's the same size, but really a very fine piece of engineering, twin ball race. So I see it as the Mills of the 21st century. So it's a fitting engine to have in that issue. So what does an editor do? You're perhaps wondering, do I spend all my time just building and flying and instructing minions to do the work? Well, if only. It's only me as far as, you know, full-time on the magazine, plus designers who do all the layout and so on. So if I don't do it, it don't get done, kind of thing. But key to the success of the magazine are the contributors, and I'm happy to say we've got some very good and diverse contributors, which make all the difference to having a readable magazine. I'm always on the lookout for anybody with interesting things to share, particularly how-tos and how to do things. It doesn't matter if your English isn't brilliant, because my job is to make sense of that, but having some good quality photographs is important for contributors. So the latest issue is the December issue, and slightly unusually, we've got quite a bit of car information in there. It's always been something that has been in Aeromodeller right back to D.A. Russell's time at the Eton Bray Model Sportsdrome. They had tether car racing, and with the commissioning of the new track at the Buckminster National Centre, we've now got a couple of places in the UK where we can sensibly run these cars, and there are products coming out, particularly things like the Redfin twin shaft engine and a chassis that can be the basis. The latest issue has got a free plan for what they call air driven car, so you can use a stunt engine to power a car if you want to get experience. So really, I'm looking with Aeromodeller to build on the heritage of what's gone before. There'll be a mixture of old stuff, but not just rerun for the sake of it. There has to be a new angle on anything that we run. And these days, obviously, with things like small field flying becoming the norm, putting radio assist into perhaps free flight models is one area. I know it's contentious for some, but it perhaps allows us to fly where we wouldn't normally be able to. So that's pretty much the end of my presentation, and I'm going to hopefully move over to the camera now, if you'll bear with me a moment. Good, I'm back. Right, so tell you a bit about what we're doing in Aeromodeller now that I think links into what happened in the past. So obviously, in the very earliest days of Aeromodeller, it wasn't even balsa wood. It would have been hardwoods, it would have been cane and things like that. And so pre-war, some modelers were very suspicious of even using balsa wood, as it wasn't oilcloth and linen and things like that. I think where we're trying to move things forwards is with items like this. I have a contributor, Brian Spencer, who is writing a series of articles for me on 3D printing. Now, he started off very much trying to emulate structures in balsa. So you think of things like Keelcraft flying scale, JetX models. So he's worked on things like the Sabre and so on, but he quickly realized that it was wrong just to try to duplicate all the placements of the formers and the stringers and so on. So over a matter of months, and he's described this in Aeromodeller, how he's refined these designs and made them lighter, made them stronger, working out different ways of printing. this is one of his latest prints, which is for Messerschmitt ME262. It was a version that was never made, because normally the twin jet engines are mounted on the wing, underneath the wing. These are actually incorporated in, but Brian is working on this to be able to produce a flying model which will have 2 EDF engines in. And this was an early one. He's already managed to improve the weight of this, and he's very inventive. So it's not just a matter of sitting there and pushing a button and you get a 3D structure out. He is having to do the CAD design first, working out how to replicate the scale outline, and doing all the things we've always had to do with flying models, working out how to lighten it, where to put the engines, etc. So I've been vastly impressed by what Brian's done, and thank him for sharing this with the Aeromodeller readers, and he's continuing to run with that. So that's perhaps something fairly complex. I'll just show you something else that he's been working on, which I wonder how many people recognize what this is. Well, actually, it's the components of a BMFA dart. So Brian is working with the BMFA on making this sort of design available for schools and colleges, because rather than us trying to force aeromodelling into young people's teaching establishments and so on, the best way to do it is to tap into what they're already doing at school, at college. So the STEM push and design and technology courses, to get people to start, first of all, with Brian's pre-prepared files, and then do their own variations to see how they perform, is a great step to introducing people to aeromodelling, doing something they would have to do anyway. So more power to Brian with his work on this. So that's, I think, a modern version of something that's Aeromodeller's always done. I think engine reviews are always very popular. This is, we're very lucky having Alex Finn with Redfin Engines developing new products in this country. I think this is an absolute sweetie that we've reviewed in Aeromodeller. It's a twin opposed cylinder diesel. And again, the engineering work they're made in the Ukraine has really helped make something which is only, it's 2 half cc cylinders, make sure it works and runs properly. And again, I think the difference I can make with a magazine like Aeromodeller, rather than all the information on the web, is Maris will do a proper engine review. He'll put together proper torque and performance charts and so on, so people can see the reality of an engine rather than just the marketing, if you like. So that's kind of talking about where we've been and where we are. If I look at what we're doing next month, so the January issue is at the printers as I speak and be out on the 17th of December. We've got stuff about 2 free plans. So there's a half A version of the Can-Do Stunter, which was flown by Peter Cock in 1948 at the Gold Trophy meeting. That together with a review of a new Redfin engine at 1cc. There's also a plan for a small-scale mini-mower glider, called the Baby Mini-Mower. And we do things like we're celebrating the latest world record achieved by Ken Morrissey and Dick Hart, which they set with a pulse jet model, so you can find out more about that. And also, I'm very pleased to say, got the support of Deluxe Materials to put together a competition I think most modelers have used at least one Deluxe Materials product, and they've got over 100 products, not just adhesives, but finishing products and lubricants and all sorts. And what we're looking for are people who are using the products, perhaps not in the way that Deluxe Materials intended. So there'll be a competition with Deluxe Materials prizes for people to share their innovative use of Deluxe Materials products. So that's all to come in the next issue. Beyond that, I'll just show you something I've built during lockdown, which is this little 2-channel powered glider. This is called the Piccalilli. It was designed by my father back in 1965 and never been published. And I kind of got it out of retirement and built one. Originally, it would have been for single channel. I've got 2 channels on rudder and elevator. Being my father's son, I've got a small Elfin mini replica on the front, but I'm sure it would probably do very well with a small electric motor, but that's not quite my favorite. So that's I've got to draw up the plans because it's only some sketchy plans that my father left. So once that's all drawn up, that will be in a future issue as well. And so yes, more of the same. There'll be more on 3D printing in the future. I've got stuff on control line speed, both IC and electric, kit reviews, trying to cover many different aspects of what I'd call general aeromodelling. And really, that's probably about it from me as far as the formal presentation goes. I know we've had one question in already, and if I do that first, then hopefully if you're tapping away, you'll get Andy and Mark coming up with some possible questions for me as well. So the first question we had beforehand was from Malcolm Ross. So hello, Malcolm, if you're out there. And he says, how are the numbers of aeromodelers holding up at the present time? And what about the future as the main group get more mature in years? So as you might imagine, with coronavirus, things have been difficult for all businesses, I think. We're very lucky as far as Aeromodeller goes in that we've got a very loyal subscriber base, and that has held up. In fact, we've gained subscribers because obviously at the beginning, well, for almost 6 months of lockdown, shops were closed. So anyone who normally bought from a newsagent, larger WH Smiths and model shops couldn't get their copy. What hasn't helped over lockdown has been the poor performance of the postal services, particularly sending magazines abroad, going to Australia and America. We've had many problems which have been out of our control. We're getting silly situations where people are receiving some of the latest magazines, even though they've yet to get the older magazines. And in the worst case, we had one Australian reader, his magazine was 4 months late. So if you are in that situation, please bear with us. We will make sure all subscribers do receive their magazines in the end, but they are taking so long at the moment. So to answer a bit more of Malcolm's question, the immediate future, I think, for Aeromodeller looks good because we've got that loyal subscriber base. I'm seeing new readers come in from people who've perhaps done RC for most of their life and later in life are going back to the things they did in their youth and enjoying doing free flight and control line again. So one of my columnists who writes on team races, Simon Molyneux, I first came across him when he was doing Club 20 racing, and now he's doing team racing. So I think there's quite a few people like that. There's another group of people who were just doing general aeromodelling in their youth. Then things like work, family commitment and so on gets in the way. And I think we're also seeing people returning in that age group. What is more problematic is the lack of really young people coming into the sport. And we're all doing things to try and improve that, but it has to be acknowledged that whether it's the BMFA, whether it's Aeromodeller, any other magazine, it's a hard job when there are so many distractions. I'm a second generation Aeromodeller. I didn't manage to persuade either my son or daughter to get involved. So, I'm as guilty as any on that one. But I think for the foreseeable future, there's enough people interested. There are new people coming in, probably in their 50s and 60s, but I'll take those as readers if they want. So that's good.
Andrew, would you like me to introduce you to 3 questions we've got come in? We've got 3 questions here. I'm going to take the middle one first because I think this is maybe a quick one for you. And this is from David Gins. Hi, did you ever fly at Market Harborough Model Aero Club with your dad, who knew our old president, Vice Redfern, quite well? Or Vince Redfern, quite well, apologies.
Yes, I was my father's shadow for many years, and we used to live in just outside Leicester, so Market Harborough was the local club. I still have memories of going to Vince Redfern's shop, model shop in Market Harborough. And for a child, for me, it was a magical place because he sold sweets and model aircraft stuff, and it doesn't get any better than that. So yes, if you were there then, you probably do remember a young lad. I won't remember you, but yes, I do remember that.
Brilliant. I've got one more, and then I think we've got a live one coming from Martin Dilley. But I think before, Tony Butterworth, could you advise on the annual circulation of the Aeromodeller over the years? I'll stop at that point. A bit like the Dragons Den, this in numbers.
It's not as many as it used to be. In its glory days, it was well over 50,000, and we're not near that now. I don't share information like that online, but the fact that we're still here after a very difficult year says it's enough. We can always do with more. I'm always happy to receive new advertisers and work with those as well. So you always want more, but it's enough is what I'd say.
Brilliant. Andy, could we get Martin to ask this next question? Is that?
You're on mute, Andy.
I am indeed. I'll just try and find him on the list, and then we can unmute him for the moment.
It's a long question, that's all. So
there he is. It's all right, I found him. Martin, you should be able to unmute yourself now. There we go. Evening, Martin.
Hello, Martin.
Martin Dilley, are you there, sir?
His microphone may be switched off.
Okay, I will ask the question then. Keep this. What permanent staff was there in Moulton's time? The plans and diagrams had just zoomed off there, had a consistently high quality, and World Championships often had full results and were reported in depth. That made the magazine inspirational and aspirational.
Certainly many more than I do now, because it's effectively me. Because I wasn't there, I don't know for sure, but there was certainly full times drafting people to do plans. There was typically an assistant editor as well as the main editor, and there was certainly more money around to pay for freelance people to cover events and so on. So I'm lucky in that there's a lot of goodwill for Aeromodeller. So many people will cover events when they're competing there and write that up, and I thank them so much, because working for Aeromodeller, either me or as a contributor, isn't a get rich quick scheme, I can promise you. But yes, it's not what it was, but at the same time, we've almost never had it so good because we've got full colour throughout the magazine. We have access to so many model products that people would have only dreamed of even 30 or 40 years ago. And I think what I look for in Aeromodeller contributors as people being inventive and using what's around now to do something a bit different and enjoy themselves, because in the end, if you're not enjoying yourself, why do it?
Brilliant. Chat. I've got a comment in the chat here, which you'll like, from Tim Ballinger. Really like the idea of engaging the youth by using 3D printing as a design tool. Could be applies to all aspects of model flying. So you're onto a good line there.
Well, it's especially, I think, control line flying with electric power. There's so many different components on there that you could get a child to design, test out, fly in the, hopefully schools have still got playing fields and so on. So that I think one of the reasons aeromodelling does struggle with younger people today, they don't see it. So talking to older generations, you could go down the park and see somebody flying a control line model there. That would be absolutely frowned upon, understandably, these days. But you can't escape the fact that people just aren't seeing that side of our activities.
Brilliant. Another comment, another question there's two questions from John Bristow, but we'll go to the latest one. Aeromodeller was always seen as source of international news, AMA comment in brackets. How do you feel you are doing on that score?
Reasonably well, because I have contributors from across the world, particularly Australia. But again, it comes down to traveling to events abroad. I was reading up about Moulton before I came on to the call, and you know, he had friends all over the world. He could travel to events. There was expenses money for doing that sort of thing. I don't even get expenses money for traveling to events in the UK, let alone abroad. So I think John has been very good in the past by covering the Toledo Aeromodelling trade show, and I thank him for that. And that's how we do it. Basically, it's contributors believe in what I'm doing and are happy to go that extra mile to help.
Brilliant, brilliant. Andy, I've lost the other question off the screen. I don't know whether you've got that. You could. Sorry, you're on mute again, Andy. Sorry.
You're still muted, Andy.
Right, sorry about that. Yeah, I think you've answered all the questions. There was a comment from John Bristow saying he's loved the talk. Right. The way you've catalogued the legends of the industry and love the painted front covers. And he's always wanting to help out. That's John Bristow from Deluxe Materials.
Thank you, John. Yes, I appreciate his help. So as I say, in the old days, perhaps money talked, and now it's relationships, and it's not a huge industry, aeromodelling. Nobody's out there getting rich. So in the end, it's about people working together, and I'm very lucky to have people who are willing to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you. I don't know what the time is. We've got 15 minutes schedule. Is there any more questions? Got a comment coming in.
I've just seen a comment from Chaz Campen, yes. Wondering if 3D printing is an answer to the shortage of balsa wood. Well, I think the first thing to say is I'm not sure there's actually a shortage of balsa wood. I think there might be a lot of people hoarding balsa wood, which is perhaps a different aspect of it. So the first thing to say is do share your balsa stash with your mates, and I think that will make things a lot easier. I know there are big consignments due in the new year, so I think it may be a temporary measure. And we've sort of been here before, and I know it's been a bit of a perfect storm with the COVID lockdown. Lots more people have been building and buying balsa, and that's put a bit of strain on the supply side of things. And certainly the wind turbine blade manufacturers are supposed to use balsa for the cores of the blades. So I can see there are factors, but I've also heard of people going in and buying up every last sheet of 1/16 and 3/32, and we're back to the hoarding of bog rolls, really, aren't we? So I think some of this is self-inflicted on us as a hobby. So please share. I've seen there are various things flashing up. I don't know if you can still see them, Mark, at all.
Yeah, you go for them. You go for them.
They going to be under chat, do you reckon?
Yes, they've come up through the. I think
there's some in chat and some in question and answer at the moment.
I'll do for the question and answer first.
Okay. One from John Stennard. He says, "Can you give some info about the Aeromodeller annuals?"
It's been some years since Aeromodeller annuals have been around. It was probably about late 70s when they finished, and I think basically they weren't selling enough to make it worthwhile as a way of getting out there. But I've got luckily a full set, and if you're lucky enough to have them, they are a wonderful view and an addition to Aeromodellers themselves. But there's no plans to bring them back at this stage. What else?
A question there from David Gallier. Do you think control lines free flight is more accessible as a way into the wider hobby for the younger generation than full RC?
I think all of them together should be considered. I think sometimes there's too much focus put on RC, and because of what Aeromodeller does, I've tended to, we do RC stuff, particularly radio assist, sport flying and small model RC. It's just when you consider somebody starting off, a youngster, I'm sure a lot of us will have built in our time those little Skystreak North Pacific balsa models. Those are still a good way of getting people flying. There are modern foam equivalents. The next step, using 3D printing or whatever to produce those, great. And as I was saying, I think control line for a small school playing field and so on is perhaps a lot better and controllable than perhaps expecting somebody to cope with a full RC model at first. But I think I would not leave out any of them, and you've got to find what fires a youth up and go with that, really. Okay, have we got some chat?
There's a long comment from Derek Small there in the chat. So what I'm going to do is bring him in to talk.
Oh, great.
If you can unmute yourself now, Derek. If you can.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Derek.
Hello, Derek.
Hi, how are you doing? I sort of know at least one or two of you guys. I had the pleasure of commenting on Mr. Sefton flying a Spitfire, real one, by the way, which was a wonderful experience. Look, I live in Spain. I fly and have been flying model aeroplanes since I was about 14. Used to fly control line. What I see a lot of now is what I would call nostalgia stuff or competition stuff. I'm a born again flyer, and I've just built a couple of new old models. George Aldridge Peacemaker to be powered by an Oliver Tiger. I guess what I'm going to say is this: finding stuff nowadays, since the internet has become the place so many people buy stuff, has made it very hard to find kit. When I was building back in the 60s and early 70s, there were several shops in the city I live in, which was Bristol, which would carry stuff for all of us: free flight, control line, radio, cars, trains. Nowadays, much of what you need to get is really one-man band in cottage industry. Is there any chance of getting some kind of listing of some of these one-man band things that can provide some of the stuff? Because each discipline has its own sort of set of particular kit. Control line combat is different to aerobatics. Peanut models are very different in terms of what they need to free flight. Power is different to almost every, everything is different now, and it's all very specialist. Is there any way of finding what I seem to remember there was a product listing way back in the day?
Theoretically, it'd be very possible. Certainly when people write articles for me, I try and include details of who supplied products that they're using. And as you say, it does tend to be not the big organizations, the model shop in the local town and so on. It is small operations like Flight Hook and Free Flight Supplies for free flight products, and the other problem we have is, whereas there are the internet is great for finding all sorts of oddities and so on, some of the products that we've come to rely on, like solar film, just aren't made anymore. So it is a battle, but I'll certainly take on board what you've said, Derek, and see if I can produce a kind of discipline specific list of different suppliers, because it's the kind of thing that people in the know their little list of suppliers and who they would go to, but not everybody's in that fortunate position. So I'll make a note of that and look into producing something on that.
I think that would be absolutely great, Andrew. The thing is, unless you're part of those special interest groups, you're not in the know, and finding those people is kind of difficult, especially when they're in the Ukraine or in Russia, or you don't know what they're going to be called next year. I think of places to, there's special interest groups for, say, old Killcraft and Veron and Mercury models and Frog models, and they're made by different people, which have different names to what they had last year. I know it's difficult.
Obviously, with things like CAD and laser cutting and so on, for some of the old kits that are out of copyright now, there is multiple sources of supplies, but certainly Vintage Model Company is very good for a lot of the designs, and do produce some very good quality retro kits as well as their own new designs as well. But I've taken on board what you said, Derek, and because in the back of my mind and in my kind of address book, I'm sure I've got probably half of what you're looking for. So a bit of work should produce something that would be a useful reference.
Andrew, I think a lot will be able to assist you with that, because I think that's a really splendid idea from Derek. So I just want to quickly go through a couple of other comments before we have to call time on this. I'm just conscious of time now running out. Roger Trainer, enjoying the presentation. Derek Small, I just built a couple of new old models. Model shops, didn't we all love those? Charlie Jeffrey, internet for all its faults has, I think, made it easier to find obscure, obsolete items, e.g. there's Calpa Diesel on eBay, etc. And then Roger Trainer, enjoying your presentation, and various, it goes on a bit, I'm sure you can read that one, but just, you know, really positive feedback. So, you know, fantastic.
Good.
I'll just see if there's any more questions before we...
I think there's one there from John Bristow again. Are you going to do a survey on content and style of the magazine? The balance, news, test, construction, how to, etc. His point is, how do you contact those that don't read or buy it but might do it?
Well, that's the
yeah.
the $64 million question, isn't it?
Indeed, yeah,
Everyone's
absolutely.
looking at, one of the best ways is for me getting out there, making sure I'm at model events. So as far as what do people want to see in there, talking to people, it's also, as I say, it depends on what contributors I can find as well. So I'm always looking for people with something perhaps a bit different and new to say. And we're certainly looking at new ways of getting out there. There's a chap called Chuck Imbagamo in America who now owns Peck Polymers. He's just started taking Aeromodeller magazine out there and says it's selling well. So there's, I don't know that I'll be doing anything formal, but it's a matter of getting out there, talking to people and taking opportunities as they come along.
Fantastic.
I think somebody's making a comment about my floating head.
I've just seen Tony Butterworth's question. I should point out that the old Aeromodeller plans up to the year 2000 are still available. Unfortunately, my publisher doesn't own them. They, over the many years of companies coming and going, the plans have ended up with Sarek Hobbies. And if you go onto the Sarek Hobbies website, they've got many of the old Aeromodeller plans, including the X list as well. And about a new plans handbook, again, these days it's typically all online. So if you know of an old plan that you'd like to find, do have a look on the Sarek Hobbies site. The plans from Aeromodeller after its relaunch and also from Model Flyer and AMI, they're all available from my publisher, which is Doolittle Media. And if you want to subscribe to Aeromodeller, the Aeromodeller website or the Doolittle Media website will allow you to do that.
Fantastic. I think we'll take the last question. Susan Johnson, as a lady flyer, would love to know about other ladies who fly now.
Yes, there are ladies who fly, not many, but if Susan wants to contact me, editor at aeromodeller.com, and tells me about her experience, I can perhaps publish that and try and encourage other ladies to get in contact. So there's certainly some husbands and wives that are out there and fly. And Susan, yes, more the merrier. So women flying, youths flying, I think the more people can get involved, the better.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, I would think we better probably call it an evening there. We want to try and run the 12 sessions fairly promptly so that everybody can get back to their family lives as well. And but just as a quick plug for next week, we're going to run this obviously every Tuesday, 7:30 the same time. We've got Duncan McClure, who's going to do a talk on the achievement scheme, and I believe this is not going to be a technical one, Andy. You might be able to help me out.
No, it's just more a little bit of the philosophy and the benefits, that type of thing, rather than an in-depth look at the various tests.
Yeah, and we can't do a virtual clap, but I would like to sort of say thank you, Andrew. That was fantastic.
You can do a virtual raising of hands.
We've had a great audience, and I've been watching the numbers, and they haven't fluctuated very much. You've only lost a few towards the end, so you know, absolutely fantastic. And thank you. And we welcome everybody back for next week's.
Yeah.